Great. All right. Well, thank you and welcome to the NOAA Environmental Data Management Workshop, the 2016 workshop. I think this is the sixth one. I can't even remember. Did you say five? Sixth. Theoretically annual, although this one is about 15 months since the previous one, so not quite annual. So Happy New Year, by the way. I know it's just after New Year, and I really want to thank you for coming here despite it being only January 4th, instead of being somewhere on a snowy mountaintop where it would have been nice to be. Let me move this thing out of the way. I know this is kind of a tough time to have the meeting. We will assess whether to do it at the same time next year. But the main issue, let me move this thing, here we go. The fact that we were able to do it in conjunction with ESIP, which is Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of this week, is what drove us to choose this. And I think that's going to be a very good partnership. And the only difficult thing about it is the timing. So I really appreciate everybody's work in getting here and also preparing, as session chairs or speakers before the meeting. We know of at least a couple of people who didn't make it here because of all the crowds at the airport. Hadn't thought about that it was a really busy travel day yesterday, and at least one person missed his flight out of Denver just because the security lines were an hour and a half long and he didn't get out. So anyway, for those of you who could make it, thank you, really appreciate it. I really also appreciate and want to thank the people who helped put this together. So we had a logistics team from NOAA that included Adam Steckel, who's here at the front, and Amanda Mitchell, who are you in there, who's raising her hand over there on that side. Thank you both very much for all your hard work on this, especially during this holiday season. And then from ESIP, especially Erin Robinson, she might be at the desk there, and Annie Keys, who was also at the desk. Okay, they might have been there when you got your badges. And then Dan Keys, who's there in the back running the audio and the YouTube stream. I think this is the first ever live YouTube stream of a NOAA Data Management Workshop, so hopefully that'll work well. And then of course the program development team. So all of these people listed here, sorry, I don't want to drop this Mac here, from various parts of NOAA, and Aaron from ESIP, who helped put this together, participating in telecons and so forth to get the program developed. And then, of course, all the speakers and the session chairs. So many of you are speakers or have agreed to help chair a session. And by the way, we put this one together differently than the previous years. And so we'd be glad to get your feedback when it's over on how that worked. In the previous years, we said, let's choose session topics and then find somebody to volunteer to chair that session. And then the chair goes and tries to find speakers and participants in that session. We sort of build the conference that way. This time we sent out a call for abstracts, and we got a bunch of submissions and saw sort of how much time each people wanted, and we triaged them into different sessions. And coincidentally and nicely, the total amount of time requested was very close to the total amount of time we had. So we were able to basically accept everybody, and we did a little tweaking of lengths and so forth. But I think we've been able to build a good program, including time for discussion in each session, in each breakout session, which is good. In previous years, sometimes people felt there was too many talks, not enough open discussion time. So we've tried to have some open discussion in every one. But thanks to all these people who helped put this together. I haven't listed all the speakers and session chairs, but you can see them in the program, which I'll allude to in a minute. But first, this is the overall block schedule. So we're currently in the opening plenary until 10 o'clock. Then we'll have a break and then go into breakout in 4 rooms. I'll show you on a map where they are. We're in Marshall Southwest currently, so one of the breakouts will be in here. That'll be until the end of the day. And then tomorrow morning, we start again at 9, directly in breakout in one of the same 4 rooms. And then at 2 o'clock, we come back to this room for a plenary, closing plenary. And then in Thurgood Marshall North, I'm not sure which one that is, but somewhere nearby here, there will be a demonstration and networking session. So a little bit more detail on that. On day 1, opening plenary, these are the sessions in the various rooms: Marshall, Hoover, Coolidge, and McKinley. A couple of the rooms are open just because we actually didn't need them. But the color coding here is sort of a track. So between this day and the next day, the pink catalogs, one-step metadata, then going into metadata, and then working session data discovery metadata. That's sort of one related track. The other one that's really the most of a track is the one that starts in Coolidge, planning for the public access to research results policy, requirements on grants and contracts, and then data management implementation approaches. Those fit together really well. The other ones, you know, they either fit together or not, the yellow or the bluish track. Anyway, so the rooms change, but there is this bit of color coding. You should have received, when you came in, a piece of paper like this. If you didn't, they might have arrived after you checked in, so feel free to grab one at the break. But on the front, it has the block schedule with all the rooms and the times. And then on the back, it has the map of where we are. And I just want to mention that before I go away from the block schedule, where are we? The closing plenary. I think this is going to be very important. We have a keynote speaker. It'll be our closing keynote. This will be Ian Kalin, who's the Chief Data Officer of the Department of Commerce. This is a new position that was created this year. He's a good guy, very dynamic, comes, I think, from the private sector to us. And then a couple of talks on the NOAA Big Data Project from Amy Gaskins, who's the head of NOAA's Big Data Project activity reporting to headquarters, and then Ariel Gold from Amazon Web Services with their work on Nextred data transferred to the cloud there. And then finally, the demo session at 4 p.m., I guess out in this atrium or in Thurgood North. Where is the north? Is anybody? Is that? On the other side of this wall. So it's not going to be here. It's going to be on the other side of the wall. Okay. So demo and networking session there. So great. A floor plan, which is on the back. We highlighted in red the rooms we're in now. We're in Marshall Southwest, north on the other side of the wall. And then the other rooms are just kind of out the door, basically that way. Restrooms as well are over there, but we'll be using McKinley, Hoover, and Coolidge. And this octagon is that open area that looks down into the atrium. So. All right, this is just a one-page handout. We did not print a whole bunch of paper for you just to be more eco-correct, but most of the program is online. You should be able to get to it from here. Why don't we just be bold and test the link? Yeah, it works. That's great. You know, there's the overall schedule. That's kind of the thing that's on your front page. And then there's what's most important is the detailed schedule for each day. So you can click on day one, for example, and you see what's happening, who's chairing the session. And then if you click on a session, you can get the details of who's actually speaking there. So we've got a sort of profile page. Thanks especially to Amanda and Adam for putting these together, which details everything in the session. You know, exactly what time the talks are supposed to start, time for open discussion. Link to this, actually let me scroll down here first, abstracts for each of the talks as provided by the speaker, so you can scroll all the way down. And then a link to the session folder where you can actually get the talks once they've been uploaded and so forth. And by the way, so if you're a speaker, we'd like you to upload your talk as soon as you can into the folder for your session. Many of you already have. If you haven't, please do that. If you have a problem, don't know how to do it, find me or Adam or Amanda or Aaron, any of the people whose names we mentioned, or the chair of your session, and just make it happen. It would be better to upload first rather than showing up with a USB stick at the podium. So that's where the talks will be, and then we'd like them to stay there so people can come back and see the talks. This site is visible to all of NOAA.gov, at least. It's not a public site, but for the moment, anybody from NOAA could see those. So let me go back to the PowerPoint. So that was the online program. I showed you the session links. Oh, and then by the way, okay, so these collaborate and listen in links. The listen in is what lets people get into the WebEx, or in this case, we do have that live stream via YouTube, which will also be available. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. On the second, what the heck? This mouse is configured differently than mine, so I kind of, didn't realize it would do that. Okay. Listen in will take you to the WebEx, and then the collaborate will take you to a Google Doc where notes will be taken. So for some of the sessions, we have somebody who officially volunteered to be the rapporteur or note-taking. There's a few that don't, and that's unfortunate. If you're willing to volunteer to be kind of the lead rapporteur in a session that you want to attend, please let us know. In any case, anybody who's registered or has a NOAA.gov address is able to edit the Google Doc that has the notes for the session. So it'd be great if we can ensure that some notes are taken for the sessions. No. Okay. I showed you the session summaries and abstract page, so great. And then the last slide in this opening logistics is this, just to show the detail of this session. We're just doing the workshop opening now, and then we'll move into a kind of summary of progress on NOAA environmental data management, which I'll give in a second. But before I do that, let me stop and ask if anybody has any sort of logistical questions or other comments to make. Okay. Adam, have I forgotten anything that I should have mentioned? Okay. Great. All right. So if there are no questions, we are just going to move right into the next thing, even though it's not quite 9:30. If I can figure out how to get this thing working. I know that we downloaded the slides somewhere. There we go. Great. Okay, so traditionally at this workshop, somebody, the Environmental Data Management Committee Chair, that's me, gives a kind of overview of NOAA data management activities since the previous year, or just kind of what's going on now. This year, I thought I'd do it a little bit differently, which is to look at a report from the National Research Council that came out in 2007, talking about things NOAA should do for better data management. And I was curious, well, have we done any of these things? Are we making any progress? So I sort of framed this talk in light of that report, but it's the same information that I would have given in any other kind of framing. So this is the cover of the report. In fact, I meant to bring my hard copy. I actually have the book. It was kind of on my desk when I took this job in 2011, and I've kind of used it as a guide in part. You can get it online for free at the URL here, or if you want your own paper copy, you can even buy it. I think they should reduce the price after that in a number of years, but anyway, you can get a PDF for free. It's a good book. It's not very big, a little light reading, and I think many of you, if you've been doing this as you read it, you'll be, yep, this is great, we should be doing this, or how come we haven't done that yet? So there's some good stuff, and if you look at the list of people involved in writing it, you will recognize some of the names, some of them are still with us at NOAA, some of them have retired, but they may be familiar to you. I just wanted to quote here because this is kind of the genesis of it. NOAA actually asked for this report to happen. NOAA, I think NESDA specifically, the satellite service, but quote here is, with finite resources and enormous growth in data volumes, NOAA seeks input on how to identify the observations, model outputs, and derived products that must be preserved in perpetuity and made readily accessible versus those that require shorter storage lifespans or more limited access. So that was kind of the charge, I guess, to the committee, and the document itself ends up being a little bit more broad than that, but that was kind of the genesis of it. So in fact, this is the table of contents of the document. So you got, chapters. The key chapter that I'm going to focus on is on the overarching principles. That's kind of where it summarizes the recommendations. But then there's chapters on stewardship, archiving, data discovery and access, and integrated data management. So it's a good read. So what are the principles that came out, and how have we done on that? One, environmental data should be archived and made accessible. I'm just going to sort of show you each one and then talk about each one afterward. Data generating activities should include adequate resources to support end-to-end data management. I'm sure you all feel you have all of the resources you need. Environmental data management activities should recognize user needs. Okay. Effective interagency and international partnerships are essential. Metadata are essential for data management. Data and metadata require expert stewardship. formal, ongoing process with broad community input is needed to decide what data to archive and what data not to archive. And then finally, an effective data archive should provide for discovery, access, and integration. Actually, one more, sorry. Effective data management requires a formal, ongoing planning process. So those are the principles listed, and then the document sort of has more detail explaining each principles and then chapters that talk about these things. Have we done any of this? Where are we? Are we done everything National Research Council said we should, or not yet? I think we're sort of partly there, and I'll give a little report card at the end, but I wanted to go through each principle and kind of give some assessment of where we are in here. So archiving, we're definitely archiving a lot of data, and that's great. And these data are now securely preserved at NCEI, National Centers for Environmental Information, which, as you may know, is the new name for what used to be the National Oceanographic Data Center, Climatic Data Center, and Geophysical Data Center, and National Coastal Data Development Center in Stennis, Mississippi. So now we've got these four facilities all together, sort of programmatically and managerially and so forth. Data still stored at multiple locations, but a ton of data. This is a graph showing past and estimated future data growth. So that report came out in 2007, which is before the beginning of this, but the amount is so tiny as to not even be visible on this scale, right? Here we are in, I guess it's fiscal year. So we're in fiscal year 16, around 20 petabytes with a projected growth. Looks like a huge jump projected in fiscal 20 and going more and more. And then these colors indicate, blue satellite, orange, next red data. How come I don't? I guess orange is just that little tiny slice there. Model outputs projected to grow more. And I think model outputs are something we really need to be talking about a lot now. Ocean data sets, geophysical, and then atmospheric in situ, which is a tiny little orange at the top here. And then this separate graph sort of zooms in on just the satellite part. Which satellites? Is it the SWOMI, NPP, and so forth, the polar orbiting, or is it the geostationary satellites? You see when GOES-R comes on, we're going to start getting a lot more data from there. And then, of course, the polar orbiting is a lot of high volume. I want to thank Scott Hausman and Nancy Ritchie for getting me this figure. So are we archiving data? Yes, definitely. That's great. However, we're not done yet. There's a lot of data that is still not getting archived. Maybe not a lot by volume, but a lot by number. Small data sets from throughout NOAA, and then data from grantees that maybe we should still be preserving are not all getting archived. So we're doing well, but we're not done yet, I think, in the archiving realm. And by archiving, I really mean sending to a formal archival center which obeys the Open Archival Information System reference model and guarantees long-term preservation, not just, the computer that your program has and running and you have a backup copy somewhere in a closet, real archiving for the long term. That's what we're looking for. And by the way, I split one into 1A and 1B because it said environmental data should be archived and made accessible. So I want to kind of separate those. Yes, of course, once you archive, you want to make accessible, but I think those activities are somewhat separate, and making them too close together, making the same system responsible for permanent storage be the same one that's responsible for immediate data access is not always the most effective way. So I separated out that principle and want to talk about them separately. So are we making data accessible? I think we're doing pretty well. We issued the NOAA Data Access Directive in 2015, which says, and I hope you're all aware of it, but if not, this will help you make you aware of it, that all your data must be accessible unless a waiver has been approved, and the waiver is supposed to be signed by the DAA, the Deputy Associate Administrator of your line office, or somebody that they designate. So it's not the case that you can just say, well, my data aren't very valuable, or, oh, no, I think there's some, personally identifiable information in here, I can't share it. You need to get permission not to share as opposed to permission to share or make accessible your data. This link here will take you to the directive. It was issued by the Data Management Committee, and in theory, you have 1 year from the date of issuance, I forget the exact date, to either make the data accessible or file a waiver. We're going to start looking as to where we are in that. I suspect we're not all going to meet that timeline, but we need to get people thinking about making their data accessible. A lot of them are accessible, and that's great, and I'll mention some activities on that in a second. I do also want to hint at this other very new activity, which is a NOAA Big Data project. We're going to hear more about that in the closing plenary session. There's sort of a cartoon of the idea of sending data to the cloud and making it available. But that's a whole other way to make data accessible, really, that was not at all talked about during the time of the NRC committee. Now, made accessible still, I think we do have good online access. You can get data from NCEI, from the archives, and from other NOAA programs. That's great. The access is not always standardized. It's not always convenient. You know, maybe it's focused for humans clicking visually on a website to download files as opposed to software that's able to programmatically access the data. So I think we can make some improvements there, but at least we're making data accessible. And NOAA is actually viewed in the interagency realm as a very good example of open data access. You know, I'm involved in some of these groups where the White House is trying to get other agencies to share their data, and let's just say we're doing much better in terms of the fraction of data we have available and the willingness and the routineness with which we make our data available. So that's great. But it would be good to have some more standardization and so forth. But we are doing some efforts on standardization. I just want to mention a couple of them. These aren't the only ones, but the Unified Access Framework project has been going on for a couple of years. Kevin O'Brien is here in the room, is kind of in charge of that, putting data on or linking to all of the Threads data servers, TDS, that we know about, data in CF, NetCDF, sometimes a piece of XML basically to enhance data that either is not in that format or doesn't have all the right metadata so that it's available through here. So there's a kind of unified way to find at least gridded data that we know about on these servers at NOAA, which comprises a lot of data by volume, and starting to make accessible sampling feature data like points and profiles using CF, NetCDF convention, which actually I'll mention on another slide here. And then also I want to point out IUSE, just because I used to work there, and I know that we were doing, and they are still doing efforts on making in situ data from the Ocean Observing System available in standardized fashion. And there are others, but these are good examples of trying to make data available in a standardized and uniform way. So that's principle one. Principle two, adequate resources. And the full quote of the principle is the little text there on the bottom of the title. So I think we have some resources. That's great, but they're not always adequate, either at the agency level or at the individual program level. I would definitely encourage people, if they're starting, say, a new observing program, to allocate data management resources in the planning phase and not be thinking about it as an afterthought. Oh, geez, I got a bunch of data now, what am I going to do with it? Start talking to NCEI early about getting your data archived. Start thinking early about how you'll make your data accessible. I mean, it's NOAA policy and it's federal policy, so we do need to be thinking about those. Another area that's being worked on is a clear cost model for archiving. So let's say I have 20 terabytes of data. I'd like to send it to NCEI. How much is that going to cost me? Are they going to take it forever for free, or am I going to have to budget some money in my program to do that? The cost model for that is, I think, not fully worked out. Somebody stop me if I'm wrong, but that's something that's getting talked about now and figuring out what's the right way to do that. And then also, this is a little bit of a complaint. I think the NOAA budget process is kind of compartmentalized in the sense that, people are asking for resources for new projects, say a new observing system, and we might fund it on the merits, and then it goes through Congress and so forth. But there's no coordinated thing that says, hey, look, in the next 5 years, we're going to be generating, these many terabytes per day of new data. Have we started planning now for that increased capacity? It seems like it's sometimes kind of an afterthought of, oh, geez, the satellite's about to come online and we really got to get the data in. Maybe actually the satellites are not a good example to mention because we know they're huge, and so we sort of plan. But even then, we've had to write a NESDIS policy that Helen Wood was very instrumental in getting through the room. Through the process. Helen's in the room somewhere. Helen, where are you? Helen, there, okay, who in fact was my predecessor 2 times ago as data management committee chair and so forth, so glad to see you here. But Helen championed the development of a NESDIS data management policy, which basically says, hey, before you start building a satellite, you got to go talk to the archive, you got to make sure your data are preserved. So that's a great NESDIS thing, but I think NOAA needs to be thinking holistically about how to manage all of the data we have as an enterprise and not kind of piecemeal program by program. So we do have some resources, though. I did want to mention this one thing called BETI, the Big Earth Data Initiative, which is an interagency activity. Last year, we were announcing it as a possibility, and then this year, we actually did get a little bit of funding. So that was good. The goal is to improve the discoverability, accessibility, and usability of environmental data. NASA, NOAA, USGS in particular were kind of singled out as ones that were might get a little bit of funding, and then other agencies were, recommended to follow along. I'm not sure that they did. At NOAA, we ended up getting about $750K net, after overhead and whatever, that we could divide among some projects. So we issued an internal call for proposals. Hopefully, if you're at NOAA, you heard about this and had the chance to respond. We got a bunch of response. We got responses for requests for basically 4 times the amount of funding that we had available. So there was a difficult kind of triage thing, but we tried to make sure that all the interested line offices got something, and then we had a kind of diversity of data sets. And so now we've got basically this set of data sets with PIs working to make sure that by the end of the project, which is June 2016, the data are discoverable, accessible. Discoverable means listed in the NOAA data catalog. Accessible means online, preferably in something like Threads data service or other standard service, if the data type is appropriate for that. And usable, which means in a well-known machine-readable format with a good metadata record, and maybe even sent to the archive. So that's good. That provides a little bit of resources, but that is kind of a drop in the bucket for what we really need. And maybe we're spending more by retrofitting good data management practices onto data sets than we would have if we had in the beginning said, hey, here's the standard way to do everything. Just do it this way. Just like right now you use Google Mail, Google Docs. Nobody's out there building a new email server like we used to have, right? Where we just got a standard thing and we're using it and it's working great. So that's resources. Recognizing user needs. So I think we're sort of doing that, but maybe not as much as we should. Certainly users are getting a lot of data, and this graph from NCEI, and thanks again, Scott and Nancy, is showing amount of data delivered now, not stored in the archive, but delivered, color-coded, satellite, radar, model, ground-based. And you can see the number growing up. This is per year, so 6 petabytes about in fiscal year 14 of data getting out the door. That's great. So if the user's need is data, it's getting satisfied at least partially, so that's great. And I think there's a lot of individual projects out there that are user focused. They're saying, hey, we're doing this because we imagine these are our users. Maybe you're even going and talking to the users and having them help you decide what to do before you actually do it. Or maybe in some cases we're just thinking about the imaginary user and then going out and building something. Certainly internally, we have the EDM workshop. I mean, I would sort of consider you all users or at least stakeholders in the NOAA data management community, and this workshop is an opportunity to bring people here so you meet each other and we can talk about stuff and hash out some issues and so forth. We have frequent telecons, monthly basis on various topics, including a kind of general purpose DMIT, data management integration team telecon, and specific ones for people working on the data catalog or the data citation project, things like that. So we do have some internal discussion, that's great, but that's not the external stakeholders. I think occasionally we have external stakeholder engagement, but there hasn't really yet been a formal thing that asks the world, is NOAA doing the right thing in data management? Or at least, I shouldn't say there hasn't been. We haven't really launched one, except there's 2 things maybe. One is the Science Advisory Board's Data Archive and Access Requirements Working Group. So this is an external group of advisors. It's a federal advisory committee, SAB, which has this working group. And they meet once or twice a year. We run the meeting. I'm the kind of NOAA rep to that. Helen used to be the NOAA rep back in the day to that group. And they give us some advice. There's also, I just want to mention this new public request for information that went out last month and is open until January 15 on the U.S. Group on Earth Observation's Common Framework for Earth Observation Data. So I want to devote a slide to that. This is not just a NOAA activity, but NOAA is involved because we are the co-chairs of the working group that put this out. So here's the link to the public RFI. It's on the Federal Register. Comments are due January 15th. And what it says in a nutshell is this: we've got data sources and user tools, and we need to somehow get the data from the sources to the tools that people want to use data with. So can we agree on some recommended standards for doing that? instead of just saying, thou shalt make thy data discoverable, can we say, please use the OGC catalog service for the web as the machine-readable data discovery protocol? And so in all of these categories, data search and discovery, data access, data documentation, compatible formats and vocabularies, we tried to suggest some recommended approaches that would be useful for specific data types. Hey, you've got gridded data, use the OpenDAP protocol, set up a threads data server, use CFNet CDF. You've got in situ observations, use the OGC sensor observation service. So this document, it goes beyond a statement of principles into specific concrete recommendations. It's not requirements. We're not saying all federal agencies must do this, but we are recommending that people do it when they have a choice. And by moving in a direction like this, I think we can get better standardization. So this differs from other documents in that, number one, it's not just a statement of principles, it is some specific recommendations. And number two, it's not just a list of all the available standards. Like GEO at the international level has a sort of standards registry, and there's everything in there. Anybody can list anything as their standard or their interoperability arrangement, which could be, two people doing sharing data by this method. This actually sort of promotes a subset of these available standards as a higher level of recommendation. So I encourage you to take a look at it. But that's one area in which we are asking for the public, hey, is this the right way to do things? So that's good. So partnerships, effective interagency and international partnerships are essential, it said. And I think we're doing a very good job in there. We do have a lot of partnerships. These are logos of some of the groups, Group on Earth Observations, USGEO, White House OSTP, other government agencies, international activities, World Met Organization, Unidata, ESIP, of course, who is a big partner with us, and not only for this conference, but just as an information exchange forum for NOAA and all other agencies and participants. So we have a lot of partnerships. That's great. I think it works well. I think the partnerships are essential. And I think one issue I see, maybe not even reflected in these logos, is there's other groups I haven't even mentioned here, okay? And so there's a variety of groups that are thinking, hey, data should be more accessible, data should be more standardized, more well-managed. And so we're having a lot of the same conversations at the national and the international level, and there's a lot of overlap in the people. It's not clear to me how you sort of streamline this so that, if you've had the conversation in one place, we don't have to have it again, and we're just kind of knowing what to do and go forward. So the partnerships definitely exist, and they are somewhat effective. I don't really know how to make them more effective. I know we can't stop them, though, and I think it's good that we're doing them. Okay, metadata are essential for data management, principle number 5. Let me just do a quick time check here. 44, good. All right. So we issued a few years ago the NOAA Data Documentation Directive. Ted Haberman, who's in the room somewhere, was the editor of that directive, and we're planning to revise it in 2016, fiscal 2016, because number one, the ISO metadata standard has changed, and number two, there's kind of a new format and template and approach for actually writing these directives. But the directive is there, and it says, you must document your data, and please use the ISO metadata standard if you can. We also have some improved metadata creation tools like Send to NCEI and 8Track with links shown there. We're working on some automated metadata analysis. That's what's in the graph down here, which shows basically the top of it is total number of metadata records being analyzed, and then the blue, green, red are sort of, great, pretty good, not so great, or I think at the very bottom, gray actually did not validate. But over time, the axis goes from November 2012 to roughly the present. We started analyzing, it's not that new metadata appeared, but really the thing started around October 2013 as this count. That's when the catalog went online. And we've got more and more stuff going in, and the quality overall is getting better, and that's good. And we'd like to do even more detailed analysis of what it says in the metadata. I think, though, also we should try to build metadata records into our workflow processes and our approval processes. If metadata is just something you build for a hypothetical user who needs a metadata record, that's great, but it would be even better if when you, say, propose a new observing system, you start by writing a metadata record in ISO format that describes what it's going to do, and status is pending, right? And then as things get approved, the metadata record gets augmented. As you decide how the system is going to behave, you put in some of the detail. Even before it's there, you can actually advertise the future ensure availability of data, which is something we're supposed to do so government agencies don't acquire duplicative data, for example. So keep that metadata record as part of the workflow, and then use the metadata records to answer questions. So like when somebody in Congress says, how many buoys do you have? And then this data call comes in, right? You get this email, tell us how many buoys you're operating, and you fill out a spreadsheet, and somebody puts together all the rows in the spreadsheet and then prints it and sends it to the Congress or something like that. My God, what a horrible way to do things. Couldn't we instead just issue a query into our standard metadata so that anybody, congressional staff or member of the public could say, how many buoys do we have? Comes out because we have all the formalized metadata record and we're using it in our processes as opposed to just doing it because it's required or because we happen to like metadata. Expert stewardship. Data metadata require expert stewardship. I think everything that goes into NCEI is expertly stewarded, and that's great. And NCEI has worked on, especially with Ken Casey, who's in the room somewhere. I'm sorry, with my glasses, I can't actually see people far away. I can only see the screen, but Ken is here somewhere. Have developed these tiers of stewardship from the basic one of just preservation and access all the way to national services and international leadership in the community, such as, for example, the climate data records, right? The national what was the hottest month on record, that kind of stuff from NCEI in Asheville. That's an international leadership activity that we do. And then between those, there's various other levels. But so we've clearly defined how we do stewardship, and that's very, very good. Stewardship has a cost, though. It's not like you just put data in a bucket somewhere and then we promise to preserve the bits. So stewardship means they're actually, migrating that to new media. They can answer questions about it. They're helping write metadata about it. That's why it's actually difficult and costly to archive data, but we have to do it and we have to steward it. So I think we are doing a very good job on stewardship of data in the archive and data, stewarded by you folks who may not have made it to the archive yet that about. Our concern is, if you retire or something like that, are your data still getting stewarded? Maybe not unless you send them to the archive. Deciding what data to archive. Okay, so it said we need a formal ongoing process with broad community input. So we do have at least part of the process. We have this thing, the NOAA Procedure for Scientific Records Appraisal and Archive Approval. It's known as the what to archive process or what to archive procedure. It's not really a what to archive procedure. It's what it really does is say, to the data centers, if somebody comes to you and says, I have a bunch of data I want to archive, will you take it? How do they decide? If it's small, well-known format of a type they've already handled, great, it's probably yes. If it's big, new type, complicated format, going to require a lot of activity, they need to decide, can we do this or not? Do we have to go buy new computers, new disk space, whatever? So this process kind of goes through the decision tree for that. And it's great, but it's really kind of an internal thing. I think we still don't have an EDMC directive that really says to everybody else out there, the data producers, you must archive, and this is the step, do this, and you will be archived. Contact NCEI, fill out this form. If they say yes, do this. If they say no, then you're off the hook and you don't have to archive, that kind of thing. We don't actually have that thing yet. And we also need, fairly urgently, I think, an agency discussion on how to handle model outputs. The model outputs are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Sometimes we say, well, we'll just archive the code and we can regenerate the outputs. That may be good in some cases, but that is easier said than done. Are you really going to be able to rerun that code in 100 years if you need the model outputs? Sometimes just looking at your old code from 6 months ago and trying to remember what you wrote and rerunning it is problematic. So we need to really think about how we're going to handle model outputs. What subset can we keep? And also, what subset do we not need to actually move to NCEI? We've kind of started talking about the idea of a more would there be a way to archive stuff in place, I guess is what I'm saying. Huge model outputs, what could be done at that site so we don't move it, and yet we know they're preserved for the amount of time we think they need to be preserved. So this is a discussion we need to have. Okay, Archive 8A, I'm splitting in two. Archive should provide for discovery and access. And I agree, but I think NOAA should provide for discovery and access, because when this NRC report was written, sort of the assumption was send everything to the archive, and then archive makes things accessible, and that's the only way. I think that's not true. I think we make data accessible in place. And meanwhile, NOAA has been asked to have a comprehensive data inventory per White House open data policy. So we did do that. We have this data catalog at data.noaa.gov. It was available last year. We announced it. Michael Wengren has been a huge help. It's in the room here somewhere in getting this running in 2013. And we've just been able to bring on board Chris McDermott, who's also here to help us evolve this catalog. But it's there, it's running. It's sending data to data.gov at the US level. So if you get your data listed here, you do not have to separately list it in data.gov. We're doing it for you. It includes everything at all of the NCEI centers, plus some stuff that is not at NCEI, but is listed in metadata folder somewhere. So it's harvesting every week from 67 metadata folders. We can add more metadata folders. Come talk to us. We'll make sure you're in there. There's also a new project kind of starting, which has a session. You'll see the session called One Stop with a sort of even better data discovery method that would help guide users to data in a more compelling way, but maybe not cover all of NOAA's data initially. So I see these two coexisting for a while. This thing works, but it's a little bit plain, and we can make some more improvements to it. So we should provide for discovery and access. Here, a link to the one-stop breakout session. And integration. I wasn't really sure what to say about that. What it said in the report was the data management system should be designed to allow the integrated exploitation of data from multiple sources within and outside of NOAA. So there's a lot of implication there. The data management system, sounds like one system, or maybe it's a system of systems. Are we really coordinating all these things together to allow integrated exploitation? I don't really feel like we're totally there yet. I think we need more standardization. Services have to be online, machine readable, with well-known encodings and standard metadata and so forth, to actually realize a vision of kind of machine integratability as opposed to a lot of human labor to get data from multiple sources and put them together. It also said NOAA should improve and expand access portals, create new portals. But then since then, we've heard from the director of NOAA, from the administrator of NOAA and other places, we've got too many portals, we shouldn't make so many portals. So the pendulum has sort of swung away from the proliferation of portals is good to now proliferation of portals is bad. So, and I'm also not sure that just more portals is good, because you tend to stovepipe. Your data are accessible in the way you want to make them accessible. And if somebody doesn't know about your portal, they don't get to it necessarily. So I'm not sure the portals are the optimal approach. We are doing a couple things, though, that could be considered integration. One, I want to mention the NCEI NetCDF feature type templates at this URL, which is a standard way of encoding your sampling feature data, like, point data, in situ data from a CTD cast or a buoy or something like that, using NetCDF. This was theoretically possible, but now it's kind of standardized. So if everybody follows these, then you'd be able to get data from multiple sources and automatically kind of compare and view it together. Also, another kind of integration is integration between the data and papers about the data, papers that cite the data. So we did embark on this project to assign digital object identifiers, DOIs, to data sets. This graph shows how many we have so far, over 600, including data sets and some publications in the NOAA Central Library. If you get a DOI, it's a permanent ID, which starts at 10.7289, that's NOAA's prefix, / some letters and numbers, never changes, even if we move the data around. We reorganize the data centers, URLs change, no worries, the DOI stays the same. A lot of books have DOIs, journal articles have DOIs. Well, people are now talking about data DOIs. We have a little team working on assigning these at NCEI. The key requirement is your data has to be in the archive to get a NOAA DOI. You cannot just get a NOAA one, official NOAA one, without archiving. So this is an incentive to archive. We also issued a data citation directive. The link is here. It doesn't say you must get a DOI. It says if you want one, this is what you have to do. And if you're asked to give one because you're at the data center and you're working on it, these are kind of the considerations to that. So wrote that down. So that's a kind of integration, but it's not really machine readable automatic data integration. Okay, last one. Effective data management requires a formal, ongoing planning process. So I think we're doing pretty well on that overall, at least conceptually. I mean, we have the NOAA Environmental Data Management Committee, right? There's a link to it, and that's going well. Representatives from all your line offices are here. We have a NOAA Administrative Order 212-15, which establishes the EDMC and says we should manage our data well, but doesn't go into a lot of detail. We issued a thing a couple years ago called the NOAA EDM framework. Here's a little cartoon of what's in it that kind of lays out what we should be doing. It's not really a policy document. It's more, somebody once called it a manifesto of what we should be doing it now, kind of laying out a vision in some detail, more than you get in PowerPoint, but I think most of it is still quite valid. And then we also have the NOAA Data Management Planning Directive that says you must plan the management of data from your system. We issued it in 2011 and revised it in 2014, late 2014, so it was actually effective January 1st, 2015. And by the way, it says all NOAA observing systems must have a data management plan by January 1st, 2016, 3 days ago, or a statement saying if you're not done, when you will have it done, kind of what's your schedule for writing the data management plan. So we're not there yet. I don't think I know that not all of them have data management plans, but many do. And we're going to kind of figure out how to do an assessment in 2016 of at least the critical NOAA observing systems. Do they have a data management plan yet? You know, where is it? And then what about the other ones that aren't on that critical list? Okay, so report card. I think I sort of did a qualitative assessment. I think in the policy framework, we're doing pretty well. We have, let's call that a green light, good policies that say what you should do. Do we have full implementation? No, so let's call that a yellow. Some things we're doing great on, others. I think in any case, there's always like at least a 20% leftover where you haven't implemented for everything. Resources, I'll call that yellow. I know some people would maybe prefer to call it red in their arena, I don't know, but a few would call it green. I think we have resources, good sometimes, resource for data management, but not enough and not of a enterprise-wide approach to it sometimes. But employee engagement, that wasn't mentioned here, but I'm just going to say that I think we do have, and this is important, really good employee engagement. I mean, that's evidenced by people coming here, it's evidenced by the telecons, and just by the understanding in the NOAA data management community, hey, our data are valuable, we should be preserving them, we should be making them accessible, and I think that's really good. It's not like we're trying to force people in most cases to do the right thing with their data. Usually it's more, I want to do it, but I don't know how, or I don't really have enough money, can you help? But it's not a lack of willingness or understanding often, so that's really good. Okay, I do want to mention two new things that you may have heard of already, but since that came out since the report. One is the White House mandates on open data and research, the open data policy, and the memo on public access to research results. There's that PAR, public access to research results, is the subject actually of a few of our sessions in here, including one right after this in the Coolidge Room, Planning for PAR, talking not only about internal data, but also grantee data and about publications. So this is kind of a whole new thing. And then the big data project. I'm going to show this cartoon, even though we're going to have a keynote session about it, because I don't think they're going to use this slide, just to summarize my view of it. We're going to keep our master copy of data. We're going to have a catalog and metadata and good data access services. We're still doing that. That's agency doing it. But can we send a working copy of some of our data sets into the cloud, into commercial pay-as-you-go, on-demand computing resources, so that other people, not NOAA, anybody who wants to, can actually work directly on our data without having all the infrastructure to transfer huge data sets to their side and invent new products, new industries, new lines of business that don't exist yet, that we're not going to be in a position to do. Just like the commercial weather industry sprung up with NOAA data, there's probably latent value in a variety of NOAA data sets that has not yet been exploited. And NOAA is part of the Department of Commerce, which is interested in seeing U.S. commerce thrive, right? So we're trying this, and we have this partnership with Amazon, Google, IBM, Microsoft, and Open Cloud Consortium, which you'll hear more about in the closing keynote. All right, so I just want to leave you with this. The overall vision is that all of our data should be discoverable, accessible, usable, and preserved for anybody now, and your grandchildren not yet alive who might want to come to the data. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll take any questions if we have a few minutes left. I guess I'm officially the chair of this session, so does anybody have any Any questions? Excellent. You've understood well. If you have any questions that you don't wish to ask publicly, feel free to ask later. That's totally fine. I think now we're going into coffee break until 10:30. Let me go back to the block schedule here. Hold on a second. Well, you have it on your paper, right? Coffee break till 10:30, and then note what room to go in. There's this one and then the other three for the other breakouts. So thanks again.